Good morning, good evening, or good night, I must say, depending on where you are, in which time zone, in which part of the world, because we have people from all over the world joining these meetings. But what I can say is namaste. Namaste at any time of the day, anywhere, any time zone. It's universal. So namaste and welcome. Now, as we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic is still rampant. So that means that the best place to be right now is at home, safe with family and friends. And remember to wash your hands regularly, sanitize your environment, and when you're in public places, keep your mask on and do not forget about social distance. Now, some few updates we have. We note the recent statement by the Foreign Secretary of Guyana, Mr. Robert Persaud, that Guyana needs 800,000 persons in the diaspora for Guyana to become the Dubai of the Caribbean, which is an amazing goal he has. So there are lots of opportunities for you in Guyana. Now, we are also delighted to know that Indians continue to excel in horse racing in Jamaica. Jockey Sean Bridge Mohan from Jamaica has recently won 2 races at fairgrounds in the USA. In Trinidad, the opposition leader, Ms. Kamla Persad Visser, has retained her top position, which is amazing for a woman. She has done this in last week's internal election for leadership. Amazing. However, her party is not being consistently aggressive in attacking the ruler PNM government. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Centre, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. We are dedicated to critically exploring and discussing the most pressing issues and events that impact mainly Indo-Caribbean people in the region. We believe that they and their views are often marginal or marginalized in the mainstream media, informal discourses, and in public groups, organizations, and institutions. For example, yesterday, the University of Trinidad and Tobago held a webinar on the 50th anniversary of the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad. However, the university has never held a seminar on the historic Jose or Muharram massacre of Indians that took place in 1884. So this is definitely something we can talk about. I love the fact that they have held a Black Power Revolution at the University of TNT, but the same happened in 1884 with the Muharram massacre of Indians in 1884. Now, this meeting would end at 9 p.m. Trinidad time or 10 p.m. Suriname time, or soon after, which means it would be about 1.5 hours long. For legal purposes, ladies and gentlemen, and to avoid lawsuits of slander and defamation, we hereby state that the views expressed by presenters and participants are their own. They do not necessarily represent those of the ICC. And our moderator for tonight again is Priya Gopal Rai. A little introduction on this amazing person. Priya Gopal Rai, who is like me from Suriname as well. She is a consultant, part-time educator, and her academic background is in the medical and paramedical research. Amazing. Priya is doing her PhD at the Amsterdam Medical Center in the Netherlands on the topic of kidney transplantation. Very heavy, amazing job, Priya. So we would love to welcome Priya Gopal Rai. Priya, please take it over from here.
Thank you, Devika. Thank you for that nice
You're
introduction
welcome.
also. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your contribution today or tonight with us here. Please mute your microphone unless you have to speak, because it can be annoying if there is background noise. So please take that into account. Our topic tonight is the impact of Chinese, Hispanic, Haitian migrants on Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname. In recent times, there have been both legal and illegal mass movement of people to these three countries. The question is this recent wave of migrants a problem or opportunity for these economies and societies? This mass movement of foreigners would have an impact on territorial identity, culture, race, politics, economy, labor, globalization, diaspora, and transnationalism. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Indira Rampersad, a lecturer of political science and international relations at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad. Her doctoral dissertation focused on American foreign policy to Cuba. Her research now extends to Latin American and Caribbean politics and international relations. Welcome, Dr. Indira, and please speak for no more than 15 minutes from now on. Thank you.
I'm here for this opportunity to speak at this very esteemed forum. I'm going to speak to you today. I'd like the opportunity to share the screen, if it is possible. Okay, so I'm briefly going to touch on, I have 15 minutes, I believe, to touch on the Chinese and Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago. I may also mention Guyana, which is another island, not island, but a country in the Caribbean, to very, very limited extent. So who are the Chinese and why are they important, and why are we even having a forum to discuss them today? When we refer to Chinese in Trinidad and Tobago, we usually refer to people of both mixed and unmixed Chinese ancestry. Although the former, that is the mixed, usually appear as mixed in the national census. So the Chinese mixed people would fall in as mixed. But in Trinidad and Tobago, we have people who are predominantly Chinese, but they may have some Latin or English or African or Indian. And we would also refer to them as Chinese once we see the Chinese phenotype present. The settlement of Chinese in Trinidad and Tobago actually began in 1806. Between 1853 and 1866, we had about 2,645 Chinese immigrants arriving in Trinidad as indentured laborers. They actually came here to work in the sugar and cocoa plantations. The term Chinese, as I said, would include that mixed group, and it is very difficult to get statistics on exactly how many we have currently, because our national census has not been revised since 2011. So the numbers had peaked in, they had peaked in 1960. There were 8,361. That is unmixed Chinese in Trinidad. That declined to 3,800 in 2000. And it again increased to 3,984 in 2011. I can't say whether currently that number has increased. We have had, we have constant migrants coming in and trickling in, probably not as large as before, but with globalization, we have actually been seeing a lot of Chinese coming into Trinidad to work in the construction industry in particular. So like I said, they came, they settled as free laborers and peasant farmers in Trinidad, which was at the time a newly acquired British colony. One Royal Navy captain by the name of William Layman, he had suggested that it would be cheaper to establish new sugar plantations in Trinidad and in the Caribbean on the whole, using free Chinese labor rather than using African labor. So the first indentured people from China arrived in Cuba. These were the very, very first in 1847. And then 2 more ships had arrived in 1854. In the aftermath of the Haitian Revolution, the British officials were concerned about the settlement of Chinese immigrants in Trinidad, and they thought that it would provide a buffer between the enslaved Africans and the whites, because they were always afraid of that Haitian specter of another slave revolution in the Caribbean, the black specter. So they thought that the Chinese would serve as a good buffer between the enslaved Africans and the whites. So the Chinese that came were actually from very poor families. They were on the verge of starvation and they were suffering from trade wars. There have been 4 waves of Chinese immigration to Trinidad. The first wave, they arrived in Trinidad on 12th of October 1806 on the ship the Fortitude, and I have here a list of the ships that they came in. Of the 2,000 passengers who set sail, 200 passengers set sail, 192 arrived, which means that 8 of them died in the trip. They didn't come from mainland China, they actually came from Macau, Penang, and Canton. And this was actually the first organized settlement of Chinese people in the Caribbean. It preceded the importance of Chinese indentured labor by they predicated the importance of Chinese indentured labor over 40 years. The second wave took place after the abolition of slavery. Most of the immigrants had come from southern Guangdong province, or they also came from Hong Kong and Canton. They arrived as indentured laborers, and it was normal for Chinese at that time to migrate in large numbers to countries in South Asia. However, between 1853 and 1866, they migrated on a global scale to countries such as Australia, Canada, and the United States. The third wave began after 1911, and this was a direct result of the Chinese Revolution. Between the 1920s and 1940s, immigration increased significantly, and these new migrants comprised family and friends of earlier migrants. They did not work on the estates, but they came as merchants and peddlers, traders, and shopkeepers. There were also Chinese immigrants from other parts of the Caribbean region coming to Trinidad, mainly from Guyana. These had originally served their indentureship on the mainland, and once the period of indentureship ended, they migrated to Trinidad to seek better opportunities. Migration ceased completely during the period of the Chinese Revolution. However, during the late 1970s, when China started opening up to the outside world, migration resumed once more, and this was the 4th wave, and it continues on a small scale up to today. So I have some somewhat dated figures, which I got from a website about their distribution in Trinidad and Tobago, but this is really from 1990. I don't know to what extent this still exists, and we can see that we have a lot of them in the borough of Arima as compared to the borough of Point Fortin. Arima is in the northeast of Trinidad. Point Fortin is in the southwest. And we also have a distribution according to counties. This first graph here that you can see. And then we have a distribution between San Fernando and Port of Spain. And we can see there was a lot more in the capital, Port of Spain, as compared to the second largest city, which is San Fernando. The distribution, we have here total males and total females, and there would be, we can see also that there were more males than females. This last slide, let me see, I'm being blocked by this. So the last graph shows the total distribution of the Chinese community between 1846 and 1990. So just to tell you a little bit about them in British Guyana, it was different from Trinidad and Jamaica because the Portuguese indentured immigrants who had gone to British Guyana in very large numbers, they came to dominate the shopkeeping trade, which made it difficult for the Chinese to establish a monopoly in British Guyana as they had done in Trinidad and in Jamaica. So in British Guyana, many of the Chinese were actually tied to the large plantations for their livelihood, even after their contracts were up. While the re-indentureship was a common practice, Chinese from British Guyana also returned to China, or they migrated to colonies such as Trinidad, while others sought to work in the timber industry, or they aspired to be civil servants in British Guyana. With regard to marriage, Dr. Mahabir said he wanted to talk a little bit about intermarriage. There are two views on this, and I don't know which one is the correct one, because one talked about more assimilation and intermarriage, and one talks about more more marginalization or alienation where they keep to themselves. But between there was what the view that says, you know, that there was intermarriage, they claim that there were high incident of intermarriage. And because the population that came were predominantly male, they engage in cohabitation practices, and because there were very few females, and some of them even chose to marry or cohabit with local Black and colored women. And these interracial unions also included Portuguese, Indians, and in the case of Trinidad, Venezuelan mestizo immigrants, which led to the emergence of a mixed Chinese group that was more Creole or West Indian in culture than Chinese. So the other perspective is that they didn't intermarry in the 20th century with other ethnic groups, like other indentured groups, like other indentured laborers. That some of the interviews that were held is that they said that when a young man came of age, a young Chinese man, he would, a mail order bride was chosen for him from China and brought to the Caribbean. And in this way, the Chinese sought to reconstruct this Chinese family in the Caribbean in the context of ideologies of filial piety that was so central to Chinese culture. So in other words, they tried to keep the blood pure. Many of the men had the children with the African women before they married their Chinese wives. Some of the interviews that were conducted show that among 18 Chinese families, they revealed that they were having something called dual families, one Chinese and one Creole. That was very common in the Jamaican context. In terms of culture, they said that the Creolization had begun, but it was quite some time before the Chinese was actually drawn into this cultural vortex. And they maintained their cultural identity by insulating themselves from the rest of society. And the only compromise they made, they said, was in the case of marriage. And when such compromises were made, it was only if it was necessary and expedient to do so. So this viewpoint argues that they were self-alienating compared to the noble values and traditions of China. They thought that Creole society was considered a poor substitute. Chinese cuisine, we know it's now taken over quite a bit of our culture. And it has actually been seen, it is something that has spread because it allows for a great deal of individual freedom and initiative and inventiveness. So, you know, you can basically cook up anything once you have the right seasoning to get the Chinese. So they said that it was a liberal art which makes it capable of innumerable variations. It is possible to make something out of everything, and Trinidadians have actually mastered the art of eating Chinese food with a fork and not chopsticks. So basically, I just want to touch a little bit on foreign policy because I have a colleague in the audience, I believe, Dr. Theodore, as we call him. He works with me at the university, and he has done this very interesting publication published last year in 2019, China's International Socialization of Caribbean State Society Complexes, Trinidad and Tobago, as a case study. And he talked about foreign policy, noting that China was the first Caribbean nation to sign on to China's One Belt, One Road initiative in May 2018. Trinidad and Tobago developed a special relationship because we were the first nation in the Caribbean to sign on to that Belt and Road initiative of China. And in 2013, the Chinese leader actually visited Trinidad, and he attended the launch ceremony of the Chinese-built Cougar Children's Hospital in Trinidad, and met with regional leaders and announced soft loans and investments worth about $3 billion for the Caribbean. And then the next year, 2014, Prasad Visesa, our then Prime Minister, the one who was just elected in the internal elections overwhelmingly, 7-1 actually, she had visited China. She opened Trinidad's embassy there, and she ordered a military ship and asked for generous economic assistance on certain issues. So by August 2017, and now the PNM was in power, the two governments had concluded no less than 60 bilateral agreements that cover everything from trade and investment to culture and academic cooperation, which includes a Confucius Institute. So that's from Dr. Theodore and Amanda Reshma Ram Logan. They published that article, which you can probably take a look at sometime. With regard to Venezuela, I know I don't have a lot of time left, but it's difficult to determine how many of them are here. And we're talking about, there were Venezuelan migrants to Trinidad even before this mad rush due to Maduro's misdemeanors. Some statistics say 45,000, some say 60,000, some say 90,000. What we know is there are 16,000 registered who were given ID cards by this current administration before the elections. And that's a loaded statement. But I think there's more than 100,000 of them. I mean, any site, any turn you make in Trinidad now, hablando español all over. And some of the concerns about them is the homicide rate, the involvement in homicide, robbery. Some talk about the women engaging in prostitution and human trafficking. The politics of Trinidad is also linked to the politics of Venezuela in that Maduro versus Guaido is equal to PNM versus UNC. You know, because the PNM has been a strong supporter of Maduro and the UNC has been a strong supporter of Guaido, of Juan Guaido. So this is an issue that surfaced somewhat in the elections with the visit of Delcy Rodriguez to Trinidad. It was played in the election campaign. Not enough, I thought, but it was played. Then we have this issue of a refugee humanitarian crisis brewing, constantly brewing. And we saw what happened when some kids had to return recently. And part of the problem is we do not have an official refugee policy. But the UN and Amnesty International, they think otherwise, because there is something called, universal human rights. And they believe that even if you don't have an official policy, you should actually stick to that. Some of our other concerns are the social services, the healthcare and the education system, and whether we can really absorb them, and the housing system as well, because they live in not the best housing conditions. They're entitled to free healthcare and education. They can't get their children into the primary school system. And the business sector seems to be quite pleased. I saw Ratans, I went in there one day and it was all Venezuelans in every single one of their branches. And many of the businesses are employing the Venezuelans, even though they don't speak English. Some of them don't know English at all. Some of them speak a little bit. They generally can communicate with you by sign language. I speak to them in Spanish, so I don't have a problem. But the thing is that they have penetrated the business sector. And the question arises whether I think they're not getting the minimum wage, although that was part of the registration drive. When the 16,000 was registered, the government said they should be paid the minimum wage. Whether that was legislated or not, I don't know. But I think they are being exploited. And finally, we want to look at the social impact of cohabitation with Trinidadians, and Indo-Trinidadians are calling for them. Very attractive young ladies. We have in the mix, and who are looking for partners. And there's also the intermarriages which are taking place. So there are pros and cons. I have spoken to some of them when I do get the opportunity, and my feeling is generally that they don't really want to be here. While Trinidadians seem to have a problem with them because there's so many, and they see the women think they're taking away their men, they're taking away their husbands, they're taking away their boyfriends. Men are putting them up in fancy apartments, the rich men, including the Indo-Trinidadian men. The women are seeing them as competition. My sense of it is that they're very unhappy here. It's not their language, I mean, it's not their culture. They don't know much about the Indian culture and the soca and calypso. Their thing is salsa and merengue. The language we speak is English, is Spanish, the heritage, the British heritage, as opposed to the Latino, Spanish heritage, I should say.
Dr. Indra, sorry to interrupt, but your time is up.
Okay, so
yeah,
that was actually my last point. So,
yeah. Okay.
So the Venezuelans are here. Whether they're going to go back or not, it's left to be seen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Indira Rampersad. Our second speaker tonight is Dr. TURHAN DOERGA from Guyana. He's an international consultant on trade, rights, and industry, and the Chief Executive Officer of GuyEnergy. He's also the chairman of the board of directors of ALGOE Group of Companies and the chairman of the Guyana Hemp Association. Dr. DOERGA received his PhD in civil engineering from the Netherlands. Welcome, Dr. DOERGA. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. To be part of this distinguished audience and the other speakers. I will share my screen, but you have to allow me to do so. For me, I'm not a historian, so I was very happy that the previous speaker emphasizes on how all these groupings came about in the Caribbean. But what we see in the Caribbean today from a more business perspective is that the whole face of the Caribbean is changing. And if we are talking about the impact of Chinese, Hispanics, and Haitian immigrants on Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname, there are a lot of uncertainties. And the previous speaker quite rightly gave an example of the Venezuelans now arriving in mass quantities uh, in Guyana, in Trinidad, and also in Suriname. In Suriname, at this moment, they have another crisis going on of over about 500-600 Cubans at the border with Guyana who wants to come to the American embassy in Guyana to ask for asylum. The Haitians are another, not a problem because the labor is needed. And we are seeing that according to the government, 33,000 Haitians came to Guyana and they can't find them. Well, if the government say they can't find them, the ordinary people know where they are. They are all in the agriculture sector. They live on the land. More than 50% we estimate went illegal to Suriname and they going to French Guyana where they do speak French, like in Haiti. So they are settling down there in Suriname on the cash crop fields. You will often see Haitians on the lower end of the jobs. You see Haitians. So that brings me to what the previous speaker also elaborate on is the Chinese. The Chinese are the most significant ones I would like to look at. Chinese globalization is not the same as with the regional migrants. Regional migrants are looking for jobs. They're looking for a safer place to live. They're looking for better opportunities. The Chinese is a different chapter. The active growth of the Belt and Road Initiative, access to Chinese capital, global Chinese parallel economy of people and capital. It's very important to look at that because if you look at the regional migration, it's kind of simple. Jobs, safer place to live, looking for better opportunities. But all the countries are evolving as social media works. Politicians, it's very difficult to be corrupt these days because it's all over social media and the people are now more educated and retaliating. In the case of the Chinese, their globalization is different from the Western world. Let me use an example. The Western world created a system which we call the stock exchange. If you need money, you float your company on the stock exchange and you can gather the money. Of course, it's not as simple as I'm saying it, and you can start business. So if you look at the stock exchange, you have access to what, 5 million people, 6 million people. So if you need $10 million, it's $1 per person to just give a simplistic example. With Chinese globalization, where you have an emperor, and maybe it's the wrong word to use, but when you look at China, it's still run like in the old days where today they call it communism. And you have to give them credit how they have elevated over 700 million people out of poverty. When you need Chinese capital and you need $1 billion. Is $1 per person in China? It's nothing. The advantage the Chinese globalization has is that it's all controlled by the state. So what do you see in their influence in the Caribbean? Trinidad owes China, what, about $1 billion US? Guyana owes China about $500 million, same thing with Suriname. So they're making their inroads in a different way. So the question for me is more, what will be the effect of Chinese migrants in the Caribbean over the next 10 years? Because the other groupings which we're looking at, they're more the lower end of the job market, to call it that. This one is up to us. This will be entirely dependent on the Caribbean population ability to let go of the dog eat dog, the crab in barrel mentality. The Chinese operate as an extremely cohesive global team. The Caribbean people currently operate with a what is best for me mentality. And we can see it everywhere. I emphasize on the Chinese because I know Suriname and Guyana very well because I'm half and half, dual citizen. And I know Trinidad very well because we're over 20 years in business there. We have outlets there as well as a company. So what we see is, why are Caribbean people afraid, and should they be afraid of Chinese that they will take over the entire job market? When you talk about migrants, I think that's the least of the problem. As long as the Caribbean people use this opportunity of global powers investing into the region as a moment to educate themselves to a higher level than low or medium skill jobs, it should be no problem. Due to the fourth industrial revolution, in other words, automation and artificial intelligence, roughly computers and robots by 2035. So the influence of the other groupings is, I don't see that as important, because in these three countries we have limited amount of people. A lot of them are migrating to the nirvana, which is the USA and Canada and so forth. So it's kind of being replenished. Replenishment are not the Hispanics and the Haitians. It's the Chinese. So the question of, will there be a Chinese takeover of the regional economy? The global level of competition has arrived. Are you ready to play is the question. Because if we're not ready to play, then don't blame the Chinese. And let me take an example of the Indian. It is often said that Indians dominate the economies in Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname. But it is the same Indian people whose children are educated overseas, and most of them don't come back because they look for greener pastures and they don't have the amenities they have overseas here. So in all countries on earth, development was done by immigrants, because immigrants have that drive to achieve. My generation is looking for easier life, so they look at America, Canada, and other places. But the Caribbean is changing. CARICOM is now a global playing field. We can now migrate from one island to the other island, to Suriname, to Guyana, if we are educated. If we have an education, it's no problem, you get a work permit. So CARICOM is now the global playing field, which is a level of competition that has never yet existed in the region. It is time for us to step up now, whether we want to or not. One Caribbean time must come a thing of the past. As with everything else in nature, survival of the fittest will take place. It's always have been like that. So in Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad, lately, because we are also in the energy sector, we had to study, just like we did in the rice sector when we came in 1988. The first thing we did is we researched the psychic of the people. We brought in a culture psychologist to understand what do the people want. And one of the things they came back with is that these are Indian people. They love land. They love agriculture. You pay them well and they will transform. And indeed, within 2 years, they start to plow up the cricket fields, making Guyana the largest exporter of rice in this hemisphere. The same thing is happening with oil. We compared with Trinidad. When Trinidad found oil, Trinidad in the top was producing what? 275,000 barrels per year, per day. That's almost the starting point of Guyana. But you had to import a lot of people. And we see the same thing happening in Guyana. And thank God a lot of Trinidadians are coming to Guyana to help, so we don't have to make the mistakes the Trinidadians have made. But again, what will happen is that those who get up and get, whether you're Trinidadian, American, Australian, Chinese, you come to these shores, your skills are needed, you will prosper. And those naysayers who are saying, well, I was born here and I'm here and I have rights of the past because we have been slave and indentured laborers and so forth. It's in the past. We learn from it. But today is a different ballgame. I want to end with that. So the question is, are we ready to play? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Durga. Our final speaker tonight is Dr. KIRTIE ALGOE. She's already ready there. She's also from Suriname. She's a regular face on this forum. So Dr. KIRTIE ALGOE is a young graduate of the Anton University of Suriname. And she works there as a researcher in the Institute for Graduate Studies and Research. She obtained her PhD in 2017, having done her dissertation in interreligious relations in Suriname and Guyana. Dr. KIRTIE ALGOE, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Priya. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Familiar faces. So allow me to share my screen. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, my presentation differs a bit from the previous one. In one regard, I will also focus on the Brazilian migrants in Suriname. In general, when we talk about the Hispanic, we talk about the migrants of the Latin American countries, but I included the Brazilians as well in my presentation because of their strong impact in the country. The title of my presentation is The Impact of Chinese, Haitian, Hispanic and Haitian Migrants on Suriname. And I will talk about something the previous speaker mentioned briefly, which is this picture. At present, we have 400 Cubans in Suriname trying to cross the border to Guyana in the search for possibilities to travel to the United States. They have been sitting there for almost 2 weeks with all types of challenges for our government. And this picture tells a lot. It tells us about what is going on in the global market. It is also telling us about the regional competitions and the national challenges when it comes to migrants. I will not elaborate on all aspects. I will focus on some general theoretical remarks of migration, and then move on to our demographic profiles. After that, I will show some figures, and then I will focus on the impact of the migrants on the country. I will try to touch more on the prospects and then finish with some concluding remarks. When we talk about migrants, it is important to consider that we are talking about different types of migrants depending on the period of the settlement and the motives. In the theory, we talk about migrants who come for a short time of period or for a longer time, and the motives depend. In classical terms, they say you have the push and the pull factors. What is important to know that people come to, or they move from their country either voluntarily or not. They may leave their country for a better future in another country. They can find work or economic opportunities, or they may choose to leave the country to seek family reunion in others, or they want to pursue further study elsewhere, or sometimes they just leave the country to escape conflict, terrorism, or other issues such as human rights violations or environmental problems. In the case of Suriname, when we talk about the migrants, the recent migrants, we must bear in mind that the figures we produce are not giving us the full picture. And Dr. Indira touched upon it. She said that it is some reports talk about 500,000 or 600,000, but it may be much higher. So we have problems with our sources. There's a problem of under-registration. Another problem is that the data we have are unreliable because of the use of multiple sources and different interpretation frameworks. A third problem is that when you have the data, sometimes they are incomplete. For instance, in the case of Suriname, we have records of Chinese people with no sufficient data, or with insufficient data about their education and professional background. There are two main sources on migration, which is the civil registry, we call it the CBB in Suriname, and our census office. And as I said before, the difficulty lies in the background of the migrants. Some enter the country legally, others come illegally, and sometimes they stay in the country illegally. So all these backgrounds, all these issues have an influence on the data we produce. So let's now move on to some figures. When we talk about the recent migration patterns in Suriname, we talk about the period from the 1990s on. There are some studies who make a distinction between the 1990s to 2004. Others talks about the 20s. But what is important to note is that between the 1990s and 2004, we had the fluctuation of immigrants and immigrants. But after 2006, we have the strong immigrants flow in the country. There are estimates that on a yearly basis, about 2,000 migrants have entered the country. By 2013, there were more than 40,000 registered migrants, primarily Guyanese, Dutch, Brazilians, and Chinese in Suriname. And another thing to note is that most of the migrants are males. There are some estimates of 54% males and 46% females. Most of them are young. They are between 30 and 44 years old. As I said before, I've also focused on the Brazilians, and this slide gives you an impression of the migrants. We have Guyanese, Brazilians, Chinese, and the smaller groups are Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, and other Latin American Caribbean countries. I have excluded the Dutch from this presentation. Here we have some figures. This is of the civil registry. It is in Dutch. It is retrieved from a publication by Lambert's Halleweg and Rietveld in 2014. And it shows you some data on the Chinese migrants. As you can see, it differs from the previous statistics I gave you. In total, between 2004 and 2014, we had about 6,000 people from China. And only in 2012, we had about 600. So you see that you have different figures. What is important to know is that regardless the reliability of the figures, we can see the impact of migrants on the country. And you see it in terms of demographic composition. You see it in the economic field. You see it in geographical distribution. You also notice some social impact. And last but not least, we have noticed some issues in terms of crime and human trafficking. Let me briefly go through these components. As I said, when you have migrants and they stay here for quite some time, it changes the face of your country. Between 2004 and 2012, the share of Brazilians has increased. The Brazilians in 2004 they were about 6,000, and in 2012 about 5,000. The Chinese between 3,500 and 4,000. Haitians about 700, and other about 1,500. What is necessary to note is that they change the demographic composition, but when you put it in a larger framework of ratio, you see that Suriname is actually at the lower side of the ratio. Internationally, Jack Macker made a report of our ratio of the migrants ratio per 1,000, and he said that we have a ratio of between 0.6 and 3.4. This is far low when we look at the international countries, at the international fora. Australia, for instance, has a ratio of 6, New Zealand of 5, and Canada of 6. So we are at the lower side. The demographic changes can be differentiated. You can look at ethnicity, you can look at religion. I took a religion just to illustrate the impact of migrants on the country. Brazilians, Chinese, and Haitians have contributed to the share of Christian population in country. In total, according to the census of 2012, they contribute to 4% of the Christian population, and the largest percentage comes from the Brazilians and the Haitians. In fact, you have areas where they have Brazilian churches, mostly Pentecostal and evangelical churches. They are more visible now. In addition to the demographic composition, you also have their influence on economy and the labor market. The Brazilians arrived in Suriname since the early 1990s, and they are working primarily in the small-scale gold mining business. We also call them the garimpeiros, and the related businesses such as shop and bar ownership, operations, gold buying houses, but also sex workers. When you look at the Chinese, they are more into the retail and construction sector. They also have they are also part of the urban agriculture. For instance, I live in Camagüey, and you see that the new Chinese, they have small lands where they grow crops, and they sell it to Chinese supermarkets. It is important to emphasize that when we talk about the new migrants, new Chinese migrants, they enter the country under influence of the Chinese network in retail. So the Chinese networks in Suriname facilitate the new Chinese migrants. They come in the country, and they sometimes start as informal vendors, and then they continue in the market sales, followed by small cook shops, and gradually they move from the informal to the formal economic sector. When you look at the Cubans now, there's a lot to say about the Cubans. We have a share of Cubans who work as medical specialists and nurses, but there are also a growing share of low-skilled laborers. They work as painters, gardeners, and other forms of cheap laborers. As I said before, the Brazilians are in the formal and the informal economy. But what is also necessary to tell is that they have an influence on the cash flow in the country. They send money back to their homes by using transfer companies. According to the World Bank, there are estimates of remittances of $8 million. Some say that this is an underestimate number, but we don't know. Point is that they sent money back to their home country. As I said before, their settlements have an influence on the country. When you look at the Brazilians, they have settlements in Paramaribo. There's even a place called Little Belém that's in the capital of Suriname, which is Paramaribo. And you can see in the picture there's a picture of the supermarket. It's called Transamerica Supermercado, I guess, which is like where you have a concentration of Brazilians. The Chinese also settle in Paramaribo, while you have large concentrations of Haitians in Saramacca. They also work at the plantation farms. So this is an important one. I'm going to share this this slide based on my own experiences and observations. The social impact. I remember a friend of mine who was telling me about he's an Indian, and he went to a district. It's called KIRTIE, the western district bordering to Guyana, and he said he went there to visit a friend for a marriage. How we say it in English? They call it bachi. It's like
a proposal.
Matchmaking appointment. The bride is going to see the groom, and all families are involved. And he went there as an elder brother. And when he arrived there, the groom to be said to him, "Bhai," meaning brother, "I have something to tell you." And my friend was listening to him, and he said, "What happened, Bhai?" And he said, "Bhai, I don't want to do this marriage. I'm in love with someone else." So my friend was like, "What happened? We are having the bachi, your parents are involved, the lady is coming. Who is this new lady?" And he said, "She's a beautiful Venezuelan lady." And my friend was like, "Okay, do I know her?" And he said, "No, you don't know, but you may want to see her." So my friend saw her, and he said the lady was, she was a medical student in Venezuela, She arrived in Suriname and she was looking for decent jobs. Then she met this guy in KIRTIE, and she started to work for him. Initially, she started to work as a domestic worker, as a maid, despite her education, and then they fell in love. Then she fell in love with the other guy, and when my friend asked her why she chose to go with the guy, despite knowing that he is going to marry someone else, her answer was, I am prepared to live as his wife, as a decent person, rather than ending up as a sex worker and spending the night every night with someone else. And this shows the problem in our social world. This shows the problem with relationships. It changes the social climate. I've also seen that Cuban ladies also with degrees, academic degrees, working as a nanny in Surinamese families, and then they work there. And Surinamese families, they learn the language. They have a mix of Spanish and the lingua franca, the Sranantongo. And in all those interactions, their romantic relationships develop between the nannies or the domestic workers with families of the ones hiring the Cuban ladies. So you get you get different patterns in
KIRTIE, as much as we like it, I think you should wrap it up.
I will wrap up
here.
just to yes. And the final thing is that all these migrants, they are not free of problems. There are some signs of human trafficking, and according to the 2014 Global Slavery Index, Suriname is on the 19th rank on the list of 167. And to finish my presentation, we made some prospects of migrants in Suriname, and according to some prospects, by 2024, 50%. No, the largest groups will be Brazilians, followed by Chinese, and there will be more males than females, and this will affect our social structure. Migrants influence our economy, demography, and culture, but we must bear in mind that the disparity between official data exists. The gender imbalance remains, and to deal with all these effects, policies are needed, and we must continue with implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. KIRTIE ALGOE, and also all the speakers. We are now going to the questions, comments, and contributions part, and please keep in mind that they have to be short, followed by brief responses by the presenters. So, any questions?
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Indira Rampersad. I noticed in the chart that you displayed there between 1960 and 1990 in Trinidad, the Chinese population plummeted significantly. Would you say that was the impact of declining fertility or out-migration, or would you say immigration, or a combination of both? As one, you can go ahead and answer that, and I have a follow-up question.
I didn't hear the last part. It's because of what were your suggestions? Because of what?
Declining fertility levels among the Chinese, and immigration.
I wouldn't. The data didn't present anything on decline in fertility. So I think it had to do with the actual amount, the actual immigration itself. Yeah, they didn't go into real reasons. The data never went into real reasons, but somehow I don't think it had to do with fertility. I think it had to do with less people coming.
Okay, thank you. I want to make a general comment. I've been listening to all the speakers, and the lack of data of people entering into the country, whether legally or illegally, it reflects back on the governments of each territory, their inability to keep proper records. If you come through the regular channel, there must be official record from immigration, which you can get that. There are no official or illegal ways. And if these people are working, they must have records within businesses where they can go through income tax returns and find them and do the estimates. But they don't have the willpower to do that. They always claim they don't have enough resources, but they can easily do that and get a good, because if you don't have a feel of how many people, how you can do constructive economic planning for these people, and it's going to become worse because Guyana people are going to flow into the country, and a lot of them coming through backtrack through illegal way, and the system will be overwhelmed because you need not only legal, illegal, so you can plan for housing and other social services like education, etc. And I can see this will be a terrible problem in the future if they don't try to address this. And there are ways where they can get data on illegal migrants if they really want to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tarasi. Next question.
Can I say a few words? This is Albert.
Yes, please.
From Belize. As some of you saw my comments in the chat, because we are so surrounded by Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, Belize has been experiencing rapid increase in all Latins and now of late Chinese. So we are mature in that perspective of having Latins in the country to the point that now they are majority. They've taken over from the Creoles, who used to be majority. So the society has changed drastically. And so I'm sharing this with you so that you recognize that immigration will eventually take foot and there will be adjustments and we'll have to deal with it. I wrote something about the Chinese. We have the same history as Trinidad. The first Chinese came from Hong Kong and South China, but there were not many. And so their influence was not frictional. Presently, the economic structure, particularly retail in Belize, has been dominated by Chinese, very wealthy Chinese merchants. These are not the poor ones. They have 3-story buildings. They take up nearly a whole block in nearly every village in that country, of my country. There's a huge Chinese store. So they're taking over our country in an economic way, but I have to be cautious because they are endorsed by the political leadership. So I wrote in the chat that all our countries need to dust off our immigration policy and really figure out how many of the different groups of people you want. So Dr. Singh, you're right on the money. We need to have the right data to be able to understand. And by the way, our borders are porous. They come in, live, and after a while, we have to give them citizenship. So it is very complicated. The challenge with the Chinese is they have economic power, and you've been living in Belize, poor, very poor, 50% are poor, and all of a sudden these folks come in and they just take over economically. So you feel like a second-class citizen. So I like the first presenter where we have to learn to play the game. However, the game does not have the same rules for everybody. So I'm not being critical without sense. I want all of us to figure out how to incorporate the Chinese and all the immigrants, because they will be coming. The question is, how do we integrate? Not an easy challenge, very volatile, very sensitive. And I'll give you one thing to lighten it up a little bit. I teach in the Bahamas many years. And when the Jamaicans come over to the Bahamas, they take over the Bahamian men. And therefore, there's that friction of intermarry and the challenge of the Jamaican women taking over the Bahamian men because they're more docile. So we got a lot of issues with immigration when you talk about other people coming in with different cultures. So I stop at that point to make you see that we have our share and we've gone way ahead in terms of trying to understand. And by the way, it is the most beautiful child to see a Black Chinese mixed with a white picnic.
Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Next,
I
please.
wanted to speak a couple minutes. I would like to echo what Albert just said. I think it's really important for us to have a handle on immigration, especially with regards to the Chinese. I'm kind of concerned, maybe this is a question for Dr. Durga. He seems to give the impression that there's nothing that we can do, that it's a case of survival for the fittest, and just throwing up your hands and saying there's absolutely nothing we can do. I think it's really important, considering our small population, for us to take a page out of the Middle Eastern countries. They have recognized that their population is small, but that they need labor from elsewhere, and they have a very strong hand in their limitations with regards to citizenship, for example. Okay, so you can live there for years and years, and you can even be born in that land, you're not given citizenship. The point is, I think it is vital for us to be aware of how immigration can really affect many aspects of the land, social, political, cultural. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say something.
Can I answer that? Can
Yes,
I
Dr.
answer that as it was directed? Okay, it's not that I'm throwing up my hands, but please understand that I came to Guyana in 1988, and I saw what Guyana was after 28 years of Burnham. A complete mess, the poorest in this hemisphere. I lived through the criminal, how they destroy those countries. So the problem we have is that we are voting for the wrong people. And when new blood comes into the country and gives a new perspective, I don't think we should necessarily oppose it, because our people have left for greener pastures. And as I said, you look at every country which has developed in a dramatic and in a good way, it's the immigrants, because they come and they have this need to achieve. Yes, I do agree that you have to protect the people of the country itself, but aren't we all descendants of immigrants? Isn't it the same problem we're seeing in America today? So we have to be more liberal. We have to be more careful not to oppose people from the outside. As you really said, you said it, the person from the gentleman from Belize said it good. It's not the Chinese who came as laborers. These are people who are very virgin in business. They manufacture, they do trade, and they elevate a whole society. Because we were at a standstill. We were at a standstill. And if you look at Suriname, every turn you make in Suriname is a huge Chinese store. Take a small place like Nikeri. I was born there. Nikeri, even my parents' property are now leased to Chinese, and they pay top dollars. So they kickstart the economy. They work hard, and if you work hard, go ahead.
I appreciate what you're saying. My problem with your comments, Dr. Durga, is that you seem to be speaking in the past tense a lot. There are a lot of Guyanese who have absolutely no intention of moving out. I'm Guyanese, and I've left Guyana quite a long time, but I still have great ties there, and I do plan on going back. The point is that I think it's very important for us to really be sensitive, be careful, be prudent in our immigration policies. As I said, it affects many aspects, and no, we can't just say, okay, que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. I think it's important for us to have a well thought out, well structured, a very wise policy with regards to immigration.
May I tell you the following? May I say the following? We have had a devastated fight to preserve the democracy in Guyana, and I was here all the time. We had tremendous support from the Guyanese diaspora, from the Americans, from the British, from the Canadians, and so forth. So I know firsthand what it means. So yes, we're looking towards the diaspora. They have a wider view. They have been outside to come back and help build this country. But they're not coming back in droves. Chinese are, Venezuelans are. So we need the labor, we need the skills. So what I'm telling the Guyanese in the diaspora, please don't only criticize. You have helped Guyana with your remittances, which Guyanese are very thankful for. But it's time that Guyanese can say that, you know what, we don't need that anymore. And the diaspora can come back home. They do have an alternative to choose to come back home. So please approach it in a positive way, not in a negative way.
My last point is that it is essential that we look at problems not only from an economics perspective. Okay, it's not just money is significant. There are other things such as culture, yeah, and of course politics.
Sir, I was born in a Hindu home, and culture is very important. But basically, you're telling me the same thing. So if you're Indian, Indians take forward their culture wherever they go, whether it's New York, whether it's Fiji, whether it's Suriname. The culture is a different thing from economic prosperity. And I hate racialism. You know, if people want to intermarriage, that's a good thing. You understand? Because if you go to India, in the south, they're Africans, and in the north, they're white. So you have the whole perspective.
I beg to disagree.
There is one more question.
Inaccurate statement. I'm sorry.
There is one more question from Mr. I saw that someone is trying with iPhone. Who is that?
I wanted to say something. Okay, I wanted to give some background to the practical realities of what's happening with the Venezuelans in Trinidad, because we hire a lot of them and I deal with them on a daily basis. Even started Spanish classes for our employees. The big issue in Trinidad right now is the Venezuelans are coming because of their currency has become worthless and there's massive hyperinflation. Only today I was speaking to a girl called Sharon. She was the secretary of the Consejo Executivo in that state there, Delta Amacuro. And she told me that her salary worked out to $6 a month. And she preferred to come and work as a clerk, as a push out in a supermarket here, making, you know, a lot more, even in one tip, in a 1 day's tips. So what is happening is that is the problem with them. The money has become worthless and hyperinflation has become so powerful that a chicken is 2 million bolivars. Now, also what they do, what I know on a practical basis, is that they divide their money like into 3 parts. They pay rents, and Trinidadians are ripping them off with exorbitant rents. Only today, I visited a family that was paying $3,500 a month for a small rundown house right in Petersfield in Chaguanas. Then they send money to Venezuela back, but because of the US embargo on Venezuela, the regular money transfers don't send, so they have to send it through these people who are informal money transfers. The money goes to Bolivia and then to Peru and then to Venezuela. And they lose almost 40% of their money in their remittance. And then with the rest, they have to buy food here. But one of the things I'll say with them, they're very prompt in coming to work. They, as Dr. Williams was saying, and a couple of the other people, that they are there to try to survive, and they are constantly looking for ways. And I saw with the recent closure of a lot of the bars and other stores, now a lot of them are into house cleaning. Because today when we went to the house there, 4 of them went to clean houses for people. So they are constantly finding ways to get like into the egg farms, chicken farms, and these things. And as long as that crisis occurs in Venezuela, they will continue to come here because the money has, as they say in Spanish, no sirve. It has no value. It does not work for them. And they want They want dollars. They are paying up to $9 on the street now for US dollars. They're walking all the time and they offer to buy US dollars for $9 on the street and try to send it back. So the root of the problem is that unless that economic situation in Venezuela improves, and the Bolivar Soberano, the new one that Maduro introduced after the Bolivar Fuerte of Chavez, has slid now to 1.3 million bolivars to $1 US. It has slid from 300,000 in 2 months to 1.3 million bolivars. So you could see the kind of issues they face in terms of finances. And even yesterday, one of the girls was telling me that in the town she lives in Estado and Anzuategui, a town called Tigre, there was no electricity for 3 days. And there was one company that was making cooking gas. And that company left Venezuela and gone because all of the companies are leaving because they can't make any money and because of the situation. So I don't know what will really happen to that immigration situation. And then another thing is I tell them, I say, wait a minute, the borders are closed and every day I see new people coming in and asking for jobs. So I said, what happened? They said, well, you know, we pay off the Coast Guard and we pay off the police and they're bringing in their family. So that's another big issue there in the south of Trinidad. Down in Cedros there, I seem that there's a lot of corruption in the immigration system. So that's the kind of practical reality that's happening in Trinidad on the ground. While we may be talking, you know, well, we're speaking from another level, probably intellectually, but they are finding ways to come in to get money and to get food and to send back medicine and food to Venezuela, where there is nothing, there's no medicine there too. A lot of medicine is going back to Venezuela from Trinidad. So that's just what I wanted to say of my practical experiences working and dealing with them on a daily basis.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question, please.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Well, I would like to make rather a comment to something that Dr. Doerga mentioned about the Chinese coming to the Caribbean. That article that Dr. Rampersad mentioned that I co-authored with Amanda Ramlogan. In the meantime, I expanded it into up to this point 3 books, the last of which I completed last week, commissioned by Routledge, and everything is about the Chinese. The Chinese, as very aptly Dr. Doerga mentioned, they have the Belt and Road Initiative. And what they are doing is very different in both terms of global politics and in terms of migration than all other migratory currents that we have seen in this presentation. So I would, contrary to the most recent comment, I would go towards the more, let me put it that way, conceptual part. So in my opinion, what China is doing today is fighting the Western, that is American-led globalization, through 2 different Chinese-centered globalizations. One is from above, okay? There are globalizations from above and from below. The from above one is based, of course, on the Belt and Road. And what they are fundamentally doing, they come to a country, including those in the Caribbean, including, I know very well the cases of Trinidad and of Suriname, and they socialize political elites in power, okay? This is done within their globalization from above. But the normative package, which is too detailed to discuss here, includes one critical element, what I call the social norm. The political elites, which are socialized by the Chinese, are required, and they comply, not to regulate the inflow and the economic activities of Chinese entrepreneurial migrants. These Chinese entrepreneurial migrants represent the Chinese globalization from below, okay? So mention was made of immigration policies that should be restrictive and so on. They might be very effective when you deal with Haitians, with Venezuelans. Okay, no problem with that. They are part of a different globalization from below process. But nobody among the Chinese socialized political elites in the Caribbean and elsewhere in the Belt and Road will be able to reject the Chinese social norm and regulate the inflow or the economic activity of Chinese entrepreneurial migrants, because that did happen in Ghana. And immediately the Chinese reacted very harshly and took retaliatory measures that were very effective, and the mindset of those political elites changed. So I'm afraid that everything that was mentioned here about adopting policies to control immigration might work very well in all other cases except the Chinese one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have room for one more question or comment. One last one. Anyone?
Yeah, I would like to point out to China's role in militarization of the Caribbean. We have to be very careful. There's a report just released. I believe more people will read about it tomorrow, where the Chinese Communist Party members were named, and where they have sent the workers all over the world to infiltrate government departments and agencies to work. And the idea is to get back proprietary information. And that is putting China in a collision course with America and other Western countries, because it's not any benevolence causing them to invest in a lot of countries. It's a global design to be the new dominant force in the world. And there's an excellent article, I want to refer people to it. It's written by a guy named Tyler Durbin, Thursday, December 20th. I'm going to ask Kumar to get it circulated to you all. So China's role got to be viewed much more than economic development. It's really militarization of the Caribbean. They already started in like Africa to develop ports and airports, etc. And they get you, they give you money till again that you can't repay back. And then the next thing they take over. So we got to be very careful with our immigration policy. Our countries are small, our borders are porous. We got to, it's not that we are against immigrants, but we got to be careful, or else we will overwhelm and swept aside in the name of economic development. We have enough resources indigenously that we can tap and develop, but there is not the political will. Politicians are seeking the easy way to get around it. In Guyana, for example, the new government has said, rather than importing skilled workers, they'll be training 20,000 workers at UWI to service the oil and other sectors of the economy. These are policies we got to pursue, and just don't throw up our hands and say, okay, we got to give way to immigrants. And immigrants are productive, yes, but we got to think about local people who are there, and we can train them and they can fit in. So we got to look refresh. We have to have a new dispensation, a new vision of how we should tackle this. But immigration, we got to collect the data and make good immigration policy. In CARICOM, we can't prevent anybody from coming from CARICOM, that's fine. But other places, we gotta look very carefully what the agenda is, etc.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tarasing. Thank you all. We will end here, and I will now hand over to Devika. I must say good evening, good night, everyone, and dhanyawad for your contribution. Over to you, Devika.
Yes, thank you, Priya, Gopal Rai. Thank you for being a very good moderator tonight. And I would love to thank all the participants, all the presenters for just being here with us on the Zoom meeting. Now, I would like to thank the advisory and planning team of Mr. Kumar Mahabir. And this is a team effort, as we all know, directed by the Indian diaspora, by Dr. Beto Ramharak, Dr. Tarasing from New York, Brian Rampal from California, Cliff Rajkumar from Canada, Ravi Deo from Guyana, Sat Sukhdeo from Trinidad, all these amazing people. And we have more: Leon Brunning, Sadra Mohan, Vanita Ramnath, and Dev Sharman from Suriname. And also not forgetting our behind the scenes IT guys, Dino and Dinesh Maharaj of Sordek Studios. Thanks to them, this is also possible. Now, as I've said before, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Centre, so feel free to visit our Facebook page. Feel free to contact ICC to publish your books, magazines, and reports. And our regular meetings will continue next Sunday, 7:30 Trinidad time, 8:30 Suriname time. We will continue to discuss a variety of current topics. Please feel free to suggest topics or feel free to be part of our panel. You may also wish to organize an entire panel that is also given to you. So you may want to offer yourself to be a presenter or a discussant on the panel. This platform is yours as much as it is ours. Now, send us your email address and WhatsApp number as well. And our topic, ladies and gentlemen, for next Sunday, our tentative topic is the creation of chutney parang music in Trinidad. Sounds interesting, so make sure to be part of it next week. And if you do not get an invitation from us about our Sunday public meetings, go to our Facebook page as well, where we have live videos about these Zoom meetings. Now, in this way, you don't need a Zoom ID or password. Just go to the Facebook page and you can follow our online meeting there as well. So thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Be safe, enjoy the rest of the night. My name is Devika Bipat, your chair for tonight, and namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.